In a world dominated by heated arguments and knee-jerk reactions, one unexpected moment of grace has the power to change hearts and minds. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation as Melania Trump prepared to deliver her speech on unity. She took a deep breath backstage, hoping to bridge divides in a fractured nation. As she stepped into the spotlight, the crowd fell silent. Suddenly, a passionate protester rose, determined to be heard. Tensions mounted, and the room braced for conflict. But what happened next would defy all expectations. Melania's response to this potentially volatile situation would become a powerful lesson in understanding, reminding us of the transformative power of empathy in the face of adversity. The anticipation in the auditorium was palpable as Melania Trump gracefully approached the podium. The crowd, a diverse tapestry of faces, fell silent as she adjusted the microphone. Her elegant demeanor commanded attention, even from skeptics. As Melania began her speech on unity, her words resonated through the hall. "We are stronger when we stand united," she said, her voice carrying a hint of passion beneath its usual composure. She spoke of shared values that bind Americans together, emphasizing compassion and understanding in bridging divides. "Our differences should not divide us," Melania continued, "but rather enrich our national conversation." She highlighted initiatives promoting dialogue between diverse groups. The atmosphere shifted as Melania's message took hold. Skeptics found themselves nodding along, while supporters felt a renewed sense of purpose. It was as if she had tapped into a collective desire for harmony that transcended personal biases. Halfway through, Melania paused. "I want to share a story with you," she began, softly recounting a visit to a disaster-stricken town where people united to rebuild. The anecdote painted a vivid picture of American resilience and unity in adversity. As the speech neared its conclusion, a subtle tension began to build. Some audience members shifted in their seats, while others exchanged glances. The air grew thick with unspoken anticipation. Just as Melania was about to transition into her closing remarks, a sharp voice cut through the air. "How can you talk about unity when your husband's policies divide us?" The words came from a young woman who had risen to her feet near the back. The crowd gasped, heads whipping around. Security personnel began to move, assessing the situation. Melania froze momentarily, her composure shaken. The protester, a woman in her late 20s with fiery red hair, continued. "What about the families torn apart at the border? The communities living in fear? How can you stand there and preach unity?" As security converged on the protester, Melania raised her hand, signaling them to stop. The room held its breath, waiting to see how she would respond to this direct challenge. In that charged moment, the true test of Melania's commitment to unity was about to unfold. Would she dismiss the protester, call for security, or find a way to bridge this sudden, yawning divide? The auditorium fell into a stunned silence as the protester's voice cut through the air. All eyes darted to the source of the interruption, a woman who had risen from her seat. Her face was flushed with emotion, her eyes blazing with determination that seemed to radiate outward, commanding attention. As she began to speak, her words tumbled out in a passionate torrent. She wore a simple blue blouse and jeans, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. But it was her voice that truly captivated the room. Strong, unwavering, and filled with raw conviction. "How can you stand there and talk about unity?" she demanded, her voice growing louder. "Your husband's policies have torn families apart at the border. Where's the unity in that?" Security personnel near the stage tensed, their hands moving to their earpieces. A tall man in a dark suit took a step forward, assessing the situation. But he hesitated, seemingly unsure whether to intervene. Melania Trump stood motionless at the podium, her face a mask of calm. But those closest could see the slight tightening of her jaw, the almost imperceptible narrowing of her eyes. Her fingers gripped the edges of the podium, knuckles white with tension. The protester continued, her voice rising in intensity. You talk about enriching our national conversation, but what about the hateful rhetoric that divides us? What about the tweets that mock and belittle anyone who disagrees? As the woman spoke, a ripple of reaction spread through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others shook their heads in disapproval. The atmosphere grew thick with tension, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. And let's not forget about climate change, the protester shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. How can we be united when your administration denies the very science that could save our planet, our future? The audience held its collective breath. Some leaned forward in their seats, eager to see how Melania would respond. Others shifted uncomfortably, averting their eyes from the unfolding drama. The security team exchanged glances, their hands hovering near their radios. Would they be called upon to remove the protester? Or would Melania find a way to address this unexpected challenge? The tension in the room was palpable, a testament to the deep divisions that ran through the heart of the nation. The protester's words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and heavy. The audience erupted into a chaotic symphony of conflicting voices, transforming the once orderly auditorium into a roiling sea of emotion. "How dare you!" a woman in her 50s shouted, her face flushed with indignation. "Show some respect." Others around her nodded vigorously, their murmurs of agreement swelling into a chorus of disapproval. From the back of the room, a different sentiment emerged. "She has a right to speak," a young man called out, his fist raised in solidarity. His words sparked a ripple effect, emboldening others who shared his views. "This is exactly why we can't have civil discourse anymore," a middle-aged man in a crisp suit lamented, making his way towards the exit. A group of college students huddled together, their expressions a mix of excitement and anxiety. "I can't believe this is happening," one whispered. "Do you think they'll kick her out?" As security personnel moved through the aisles, speculation about their intentions spread through the crowd. "They're going to remove her," an elderly man predicted, his voice tinged with regret. "It's a shame. We should be listening to each other, not silencing dissent." Near the protester, a small knot of people formed a protective circle. "We're with you," a woman with graying hair said softly, placing a reassuring hand on the protester's shoulder. As security drew closer, the room reached a fever pitch of tension, every eye fixed on the unfolding scene. Would they forcibly remove the protester? On stage, Melania felt her heart racing. She had prepared for hecklers, but not this level of division in her audience. Part of her wanted to retreat, to let security handle the situation. But another part recognized the importance of this moment. How she responded could define her entire campaign. Taking a deep breath, Melania stepped forward, her microphone in hand. The room held its breath, anticipation crackling in the air. How would she address this challenge to her authority? How would this diverse audience react when forced to confront their deepest divisions face to face? In that suspended moment, Melania's voice cut through the tension. "I hear you," she said, her words directed at the protester but loud enough for all to hear. "And I want to listen. Can we have a conversation?" The audience collectively gasped. No one had expected this response. As Melania descended from the stage, walking towards the protester with an outstretched hand, the room watched in stunned silence. What happened next would redefine the night, and perhaps the entire campaign. The auditorium fell silent, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted moments before. All eyes turned to Melania Trump, standing at the podium like a lighthouse in a storm. The weight of expectation pressed down on her shoulders, visible in the slight tension of her jaw, and the way her fingers curled around the edges of the podium. Security personnel hovered at the edges of the room, their eyes darting between the First Lady and the protester. They awaited a signal, a nod, anything to indicate how they should proceed. But Melania remained still, her gaze fixed on the young woman who had challenged her. As the seconds ticked by, the atmosphere in the room grew thick with anticipation. Dr. Emily Chen, observing from her seat, noticed how the audience seemed to collectively hold its breath. In moments of crisis, she would later note, a leader's response can either escalate tensions or diffuse them entirely. Melania's face, usually a mask of poise, betrayed a flicker of emotion. Her eyes softened, and the corners of her mouth twitched, almost imperceptibly. For a brief moment, she looked not like the First Lady, but like a woman grappling with a deeply human challenge. Public speaking coach Samantha Rivera pointed out the subtle body language cues. Mrs. Trump's shoulders relaxed slightly, and she took a small step forward, Rivera explained. These micro-movements signaled a shift from defensive to engaging. Slowly, deliberately, Melania raised her hand. The gesture silenced the murmurs that had begun to arise. Security paused, their hands falling away from their earpieces. The protester, her face flushed with emotion, blinked in surprise. As Melania opened her mouth to speak, the room leaned in. Her first words were soft, almost tentative. "I hear you," she said, her accent more pronounced than usual, lending a vulnerability to her voice. The simplicity of the statement hung in the air, unexpected and disarming. The protester's eyes widened, her stance shifting from confrontational to uncertain. She had come prepared for dismissal or anger, not this quiet acknowledgement. As her response unfolded, the audience remained captivated. Frank, the elderly veteran in the front row, unclenched his fists. Sarah, the college student, leaned forward in her seat, her skepticism giving way to curiosity. Even those who had been most vocal in their support of the protester fell silent, listening intently. With each word, Melania seemed to grow more confident, her voice stronger. She addressed not just the protester, but the entire room, acknowledging the complex emotions and differing viewpoints present. Her response wove together personal anecdotes, policy explanations, and a call for mutual understanding. As Melania neared the end of her impromptu speech, a palpable change had come over the auditorium. The tension that had crackled through the air just minutes before had dissipated, replaced by a shared sense of something profound taking place. Melania's voice, calm and measured, cut through the tension like a knife. The audience held their collective breath, unsure of what to expect. As she began to speak, her words took an unexpected turn, surprising everyone in the auditorium. "I want to thank you for your passion," Melania said, her gaze fixed on the protester. "Your concerns are valid, and they deserve to be heard." The protester's expression shifted from defiance to confusion, clearly caught off guard by this unexpected acknowledgement. Melania continued, addressing each point the protester had raised with thoughtfulness. She spoke of the complexities of immigration policy, acknowledging the human cost of border separations, while discussing the challenges of balancing security and compassion. As Melania spoke, the protester's body language began to change. Her clenched fists slowly uncurled. The tension in her shoulders eased, and her confrontational stance softened. Her eyes, once blazing with anger, now held a glimmer of curiosity. "We may not agree on everything," Melania said, her voice steady. "But I believe we share a common goal: to make this country better for all who call it home." The tension in the room began to dissolve, replaced by a palpable sense of curiosity. Dr. Emily Chen, observing from the sidelines, later remarked, "What we witnessed was a masterclass in active listening and empathy." Melania didn't just hear the protester's words. She understood the emotions behind them. Melania's words took on a personal tone as she shared her own journey as an immigrant. the challenges she faced, and the love she developed for her adopted country. "America's strength lies in its diversity," she said, "in the tapestry of experiences and perspectives that each of us brings to the table." As she spoke, Melania began to move. Slowly, deliberately, she stepped away from the podium, each footfall echoing in the hushed auditorium. The security detail tensed, but she waved them off with a subtle gesture. Melania stopped just a few feet from the protester. For a moment, they stood facing each other, the First Lady and the protester, in a tableau that seemed to represent the nation's divisions in microcosm. Then, Melania reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, white envelope. "This," she said, loud enough for the entire auditorium to hear, "is an invitation. I would like you to join me for a private conversation at the White House. Your voice matters, and I want to listen more." The protester's eyes widened in disbelief. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out to accept the envelope. As Melania turned to walk back to the podium, a spontaneous applause broke out. It started softly, then grew, filling the auditorium with a thunderous sound. The First Lady had not only diffused a tense situation, but had turned it into an opportunity for dialogue and understanding. As the applause faded, a remarkable transformation began to unfold in the auditorium. The air seemed charged with unexpected energy. Melania's words bridged a gap that had seemed insurmountable moments ago. The protester's defiant posture softened, her eyes widening with surprise. Her clenched fists slowly uncurled. Around the room, faces twisted with anger or fear began to soften. The elderly veteran leaned forward with interest, while a young man who had raised his fist in solidarity with the protester lowered it slowly, curiosity replacing anger. Dr. Emily Chen whispered to a colleague, "This is cognitive dissonance in action. The protester's worldview is being challenged, forcing her to reevaluate her assumptions." As Melania continued, her words wove a connection throughout the room. A woman who had shouted in anger earlier now dabbed at her eyes. College students who had been scrolling on their phones looked up, engrossed. Even the security personnel stood back, sensing the shift in atmosphere. The protester took a hesitant step forward, her body language a mix of uncertainty and hope. Melania mirrored this movement, stepping away from the podium. Their eyes met in a silent exchange. Melania's open palms and tilted head conveyed openness, while the protester's defensive stance melted away. I didn't expect this," the protester said softly. "I came here angry, feeling like no one was listening. But you heard me. You really heard me." Melania nodded attentively. The protester continued, her voice gaining strength from a newfound sense of being valued. "I still have concerns, but I'm willing to talk, to listen too. Maybe we can find some common ground." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. People who had been on opposite sides now exchanged nods of acknowledgement. Sarah, a young college student, whispered to her neighbor, "I've never seen anything like this before." As Melania incorporated this unexpected moment into her speech, the atmosphere continued to evolve. The tension had dissipated, replaced by a sense of shared experience and cautious optimism. For the first time that evening, the room felt united, not by agreement, but by the simple act of truly listening. As Melania turned back to the podium, the room's energy had transformed. The audience, once divided, now leaned forward with shared anticipation. Melania's eyes swept across the faces, each awaiting her message of unity. With a deep breath, she began, her voice carrying newfound warmth. "What we've just experienced is a perfect example of why unity is crucial in our nation today." The crowd hung on her every word, the earlier interruption now illustrating her central theme. Melania connected the events to her message. "In that moment, we had a choice. We could have let anger divide us, or choose to listen and understand." Her words resonated through the auditorium. She shared a personal anecdote. "Years ago, I had a misunderstanding with a neighbor. Instead of letting it fester, I invited her for coffee. We talked, listened, and found common ground. That simple act transformed our relationship." Melania's words grew passionate. "Unity doesn't mean uniformity," she declared. "It means recognizing our shared humanity, even in our deepest disagreements." She paused, building anticipation, then continued with profound insight. "Imagine a grand orchestra. Each instrument has its unique sound. The violin isn't like the trumpet, the flute unlike the cello, but together they create beautiful harmony." The metaphor sank in across the auditorium. That's what we are, a nation of diverse voices. Our task is to find the common melody that allows us all to play in harmony. She related this to current issues. In our communities, we face challenges that seem to divide us. But like the orchestra, we can work together, each contributing our unique perspective to create resonant solutions. Melania's voice strengthened. Today, we've seen that even in discord, we can find harmony. We've proven that listening can transform conflict into understanding. This is the unity we must strive for across our great nation. As she concluded, the atmosphere had transformed. The earlier tension had dissipated, replaced by shared purpose and respect. People who entered as strangers now engaged in thoughtful discussions about their shared experience. As the final echoes of applause faded, a profound silence settled over the auditorium. The audience sat stunned, processing the unexpected turn of events. For many, it was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing the power of empathy and understanding. In the months that followed, the interaction became a catalyst for change. The young protester shared her story on national platforms, advocating for civil discourse. Communities organized dialogue sessions, bringing together people with opposing viewpoints. As viewers, we can cultivate empathy in our daily lives. Start by truly listening to those who disagree with you. Seek to understand their perspective before responding. Remember, as Maya Angelou said, "I think we all have empathy. We may not have enough courage to display it."